All right, let's get right into it. We're about to break down one of those super polarizing debates you see all over the internet. You know the ones. One conservative commentator facing off against a room full of liberal college students. But we're not just going to look at the arguments. We're going to dissect the whole anatomy of the encounter.
And boom, it all kicks off with this one sentence from Charlie Kirk. I mean, talk about a provocative claim. This single statement is the match that lights the fuse for this entire fascinating and honestly pretty chaotic conversation about identity, biology, and belief.
So almost immediately, the debate just splinters. The two sides aren't even arguing about the same thing. They get completely stuck on the most basic question you can imagine. What even is a woman? This one disagreement becomes the shaky foundation for the entire conflict.
And here you have it. These are the two competing definitions at the absolute heart of the divide. On one side, you've got Kirk with the straight-up biological definition. XX chromosomes, adult female. Done. But then a student named Sam comes back with a definition that's all about personal identity. These aren't just two different opinions. They're like two totally different operating systems for reality.
Kirk immediately pushes back on this, hard. He frames that identity-based definition as, well, circular logic. His whole argument is that if a table can't just decide it's a table, then the act of identifying as something isn't really a definition. And just like that, the stage is set for a much bigger argument about objective versus subjective truth.
So how do the students handle this really rigid biological definition? Well, what's interesting is they don't just throw biology out the window. Instead, they actually use another biological concept to make the picture a whole lot more complicated. A student named Juliana comes in and challenges Kirk's whole XX/XY framework with this simple question. See, her point is that biology itself isn't as neat and tidy as his definition makes it sound, and that question just cracks the door open for a much more nuanced scientific chat.
And to back this up, the students bring up the concept of intersex variations. They're basically saying, look, there are natural biological occurrences where a person's chromosomes or anatomy don't fit into those typical male or female boxes. For them, this is proof that a simple binary is just an oversimplification of how biology actually works.
And this brings us to their main scientific point. They argue that sex isn't like two separate, distinct boxes. Instead, it's more like what scientists call a bimodal distribution. Just think of it like a graph with two main peaks, one for typical male, one for typical female, but with a whole range of natural variations and overlaps in between. There's no hard, perfect dividing line. But, the back and forth over science and definitions just hits a wall. It's a total stalemate. And that's when a student named Parker makes this really unexpected move. He pivots the entire conversation into a completely different territory: theology. You gotta see the tactic here. Parker starts using Kirk's own belief system to poke holes in his strict definitions. With this one seemingly simple question, he's trying to find an inconsistency, not in science, but inside Kirk's own worldview. It's a pretty clever move.
Kirk gives a pretty standard theological answer here. He says God is a spirit, a being that exists beyond human categories like gender. So he basically places God outside and above the very binary he's been defending for people on Earth. And there it is. That's the trap. Parker immediately pounces on the language. If God isn't a man, why use the male pronoun he? This brilliantly points out a gap between a stated definition and the language people actually use, which, you'll notice, mirrors the exact same argument the students were trying to make about identity. And this is pretty much where the whole thing just grinds to a halt. It doesn't matter if they're talking about science or theology. It's so clear they aren't just disagreeing on a few facts. They are operating from completely separate, probably irreconcilable frameworks for how they see the world. And when that happens, finding a resolution is pretty much impossible.
So seeing them hit this brick wall makes you take a step back and ask a bigger question. Was the point of this whole thing ever really to find some common ground? Or is there something else going on with the format itself? Is this even a fair fight?
Yeah, and some critics would say no. They argue that these kinds of debate shows aren't really set up for a good faith discussion. An article from UC Irvine's student paper actually suggested that the whole structure is designed to control the story and, well, make the opponents look bad, not to actually engage with them.
So what are the pieces of this so-called debate trap? Well, for one, you've got a massive power imbalance, a media-trained professional against students who've never done this before. The goal often seems to be creating those viral gotcha moments, not real dialogue. Participants are sometimes even cast and paid.
The whole setup can feel less like a search for truth and more like a performance designed to humiliate one side.
So, after all that, what's the takeaway? The real lesson here probably isn't about who won or lost the argument. It's about learning to look past the sound bites and start to analyze the very structure that these arguments are happening in.
And that really leaves us with this final question to keep in mind the next time a video like this pops up in your feed. Are you actually watching a genuine marketplace of ideas where people are trying to find the truth? Or are you watching a carefully produced performance designed for an audience and meant to push a specific story? Because figuring that out, well, that changes everything.